Mud squelched beneath my boots. Rain lashed sideways, blurring the orange stakes that marked the HOA's new plaza. Ranger froze ears, pricked nose, twitching like he could smell the earth's heartbeat. I could see the first hairline cracks curling along the slope, too subtle for most deadly if ignored. From the corner of my eye, a flatbed creaked under wet boards, oblivious to gravity's whisper. The HOA president waved, smiling, clueless. I clenched my teeth. Seconds later, a low groan rolled through the ground, almost human, almost warning. And then I saw it, the soil moving, not a trick, not a shadow. The hill had already decided. Kennedy Morgan's smile was all teeth and confidence, the kind that tells you he's measuring your worth in optics, not sense. He stepped onto the sodden slope umbrella, shaking in the wind clipboard, clutched like a shield. Volunteers hustled around him, planting stakes and unrolling vapor barriers, oblivious to the subtle tremor beneath their feet. "Progress, Aaron," he called, voice syrupy, as if every syllable erased concern. I held up my folder, Rain, plastering the pages. "Licensed assessment before mobilization," I said. His eyes flicked a fraction too late. Kennedy's hand gestured to the compactor crew. "We're moving quickly to serve the neighborhood. No hesitation, no acknowledgement of data, just performance." Beside him, Tara shuffled notes, nodding silent approval baked into her posture. Cole Benson, vice president, hovered like a shadow, scanning every move clipboard tight. They weren't evil, just blind to the Earth's memory. I adjusted Ranger's leash. Every crack I'd logged, every chart and timestamp ignored. A gust shook the stakes. Kennedy bent, inspecting the mud like it was a brochure. I took a deep breath. "The slope is active," I said, voice cutting through the drizzle. He tilted his head, smirk widening. "We have consultants," he said. "Landscaping consultants." I didn't argue. Some battles are won later. Ranger growled low, a warning neither of us could ignore. The hill was listening, and so was I. The first notes came like paper knives. HOA newsletters, cheerful colors, passive-aggressive language, buried in confetti graphics. "We appreciate your concern, but please trust the process." My logbook sat open on the kitchen counter, pages damp from the morning drizzle. Rain pooled behind the fence posts shifting ever so slightly, cracks, whispering warnings I'd learned to read over decades. Social media threads lit up. Half the neighbors debated string light colors, half scoffed at anyone questioning progress. Kennedy's emails arrived promptly, bullet points bolded. "Your observations are noted. No further action required." Each tiny dismissal gnawed at the tension like water at clay. Volunteers arrived with compactors and stakes, smiling at cameras oblivious to subtle ground movements. Ranger refused the lower path, ears pricked, tail stiff. I followed, laser rangefinder in hand. The soil quivered beneath the stakes. The HOA's optics were perfect. The slope wasn't. And the first tremor, barely audible beneath the rain, reminded me this was only the beginning. I watched from the fence line as the compactor crew moved like ants over a wet anthill. Cole Benson barked orders, pointing at stakes, ignoring my outstretched folder. "We've got plans." "Everything's approved," he said, voice tight with forced confidence. Rain slicked his hair, streaking mud onto his windbreaker, but he didn't flinch. I stepped closer. "Where's your licensed geotech? Test pits, moisture data?" My voice cut through the hiss of rain. One worker blinked, a baby beard shaking as he shrugged. "We're just prepping," he said. "HOA consultants handle it. Landscaping consultants, not engineers." The stakes sunk slightly under my boots, quivering. Ranger planted at the upper slope, sniffing, pawing at a micro-rivulet. The hill whispered under his paws. Cole leaned closer, smirk sharp. "You keep photographing, sending emails? You're interfering." Threat wrapped in civility. My finger traced a hairline crack along the clay. "Interfering with physics isn't a crime," I muttered. He scoffed, signaling the crew to ignore me. Every bootfall, every vibration beneath their machines traced the slope's impatience. I logged each moment. The boundary had been violated, the risk ignored, and the first true danger was crawling closer. By the third morning, the subtle whispers became undeniable. A shallow swale near the trail held water that had never lingered, feeding a creeping pool behind Eileen Parker's basement wall. She stood at her door, coffee, forgotten eyes wide. "Aaron, the north wall. It's cracked." I measured a quarter-inch widening every hour. Across the cul-de-sac, the alder I'd been tracking leaned further roots, bulging where the clay heaved. The stakes marking the plaza had sunk deeper under the compactor vibrations, the nylon lines sagging imperceptibly. Ranger growled, low ears, flat tail, rigid. He knew before anyone else that the slope was alive. HOA emails arrived faster than the rain, polite reminders not to engage contractors, thinly veiled warnings about interference. Meanwhile, the plaza foundation sat wet compactors, stamping like impatient feet. A fence post behind the planned site twisted under its own weight, snapping with a muted crack that echoed through the mud. Neighbors whispered of hairline cracks in patios, pools forming where there had been none. The first minor landslides took small chunks of topsoil, carrying fence scraps downhill. The equipment remained oblivious, the crew laughing at spilled water. I documented every shift, every ripple, photos, timestamps, inclinometer readings. Each measurement screamed the hill had begun taking its toll. And still the HOA pushed forward. The loss wasn't catastrophic yet, but the message was clear: ignoring the warning would be devastating. By mid-morning, the first official notices arrived. Sycamore Ridge HOA in Bullet Point Perfection accused me of interfering with approved operations and warned of fines for contacting contractors. The irony stung. I'd done nothing but document physics. Ranger padded beside me as I stepped onto the soggy slope stakes, marking micro-movements under my fingers. The alder had tilted further. Tiny rivulets braided into new channels along the clay. A neighbor's basement seeped water faster than the drains could carry it. I called Sarah Miller, my county contact. Her voice, clipped yet calm, reminded me bureaucracy moves slower than mud. "I'm pushing geotech eyes on site," she said. "But until signatures clear, the HOA can continue." And continue they did. Kennedy, Morgan, and Cole Benson directed crews while officers arrived to mediate neighbor complaints. Their badges looked small against the backdrop of wet clay and shifting earth. The HOA's lawyers had drafted precise wording to delay any suspension, masking negligence as due process. I tightened my rain jacket and clipped the inclinometer back in place. Every official step was a micro-battle, every ignored warning a test of patience. The ground beneath us didn't wait, and neither could I. The morning air was thick with rain and expectation. Flatbeds rolled in at 7:12 a.m., equipment glinting under the gray sky. Cole Benson paced the perimeter, clipboard in hand, signaling the crew to continue, oblivious to the subtle tremor beneath their feet. Ranger growled low, nose to the ground, tail stiff. I stepped closer to the flagged plaza stakes, sinking slightly with each compactor step. A hairline fissure ran jagged near the upper edge, barely visible but unmistakable. The slope whispered underfoot. I raised my voice. "Stop all work, license geotech required before any loading." Kennedy waved, smiling, teeth shining as if optics could suspend physics. "We're moving forward," he said, voice syrupy, hands brushing rain from his jacket. The first real shift happened then. Mud slithered along the edge of the slab, small at first, carrying a stake, a tool, a section of fence. Volunteers stumbled, some screaming, some frozen. The slope exhaled, slow and deliberate. I grabbed Ranger's leash. Everyone back, high ground now, heart hammering, boots sinking. I watched the plaza bulge, the stakes tilt. Kennedy hesitated too long. The hill had spoken. And what it whispered next promised chaos. Saturday dawned gray and relentless. Balloons bobbed along the new fence line as volunteers arranged folding tables, coffee cups rattling in the drizzle. Kennedy Morgan stood at the plaza's center, microphone in hand, smiling like a man oblivious to the tide beneath him. I stepped onto the muddy perimeter, folder in hand, Ranger at my side. "Stop. The slope is active." My voice cut through the chatter, slicing past cheerful greetings and photo ops. The crowd froze mid-step. Volunteers paused, coffee cups trembling. Kennedy's smile faltered for a heartbeat. "Aaron, please," he said, voice syrupy, rehearsed. "This is a celebration." I scanned the wet slab. Hairline cracks traced lightning scars along the western edge. The alder leaned further than yesterday. Rivulets carved fresh paths through clay. Ranger growled, low, pawing at the earth. A faint rumble rolled beneath our boots. Not a truck, not thunder, something older, deeper. The plaza shifted, imperceptibly, stakes sinking. A gasp rose from the crowd. Kennedy opened his mouth, frozen as the first tremor cut the air. The hill wasn't waiting for permission. It was beginning its reckoning. The tremor deepened, a low, rolling groan beneath our feet. Coffee cups rattled, folding chairs teetered, and the ground under the plaza pulsed like a living thing. I pointed toward the western edge. The hairline crack widened before anyone could blink. Mud surged first at the far corner, swallowing a stake and dragging a small section of fence with it. Volunteers screamed, scattering toward higher ground. Kennedy froze, flashlight slipping from his grasp. Tara stumbled, shoes suctioned by the mud, hands reaching for anything solid. Ranger barked furiously, guiding neighbors along the upper path. Each step I took sank half an inch into the saturated soil. Stakes bent, nylon lines sagged, and the alder tilted like a slow-motion pendulum. The compactor sat half-submerged, vibrating uselessly as mud crept over its tracks. Roots tore from the earth, snapping with wet cracks. Logs, splintered boards, and debris tumbled downward. I pulled Eileen back from the edge, heart hammering. The crowd screamed, tripping over each other, chaos mirrored by the slope's relentless descent. Every ignored email, every dismissed warning flashed in my mind. This wasn't speculation. It was physics in motion. And now, the proof was undeniable. Raw and terrifying, the hill had taken control. The slope convulsed, carrying mud debris, and the plaza's remains like a relentless tide. Kennedy scrambled boots, sinking eyes wide, mud streaking his jacket. Tara clung to a tree, trembling. Cole Benson wasn't so lucky. One knee buckled, half buried in sludge. I grabbed the back of his collar, hauling him toward stable ground. Ranger stayed close, barking, guiding anyone within reach. Concrete slabs cracked and twisted. Stakes snapped. Aluminum benches flipped, caught in the muddy surge. The banner ripped free, whipping overhead, a shredded testament to their hubris. Roots yanked from the clay alder, trees bent unnaturally, snapping and rolling down the hill. The crowd scrambled in panic. Screams filled the air, mingling with the deep groan of the earth. Every ignored warning, every dismissed email, every landscape consultant masquerading as a geotechnical expert came rushing back in horrifying clarity. I moved swiftly along the perimeter, directing people to high ground, checking for stragglers. Emergency sirens pierced the rain. The HOA's carefully crafted optics were gone, replaced by raw, undeniable chaos. By the time rescue crews arrived, the worst of it had passed. The plaza was obliterated, trucks half-buried, banners shredded. Kennedy collapsed, chest-heaving, face pale. You knew," he gasped. "I warned you," I said, voice low. The ground had spoken, and in its verdict, arrogance met consequence. No applause, no recognition, only the hum of mud settling, and Ranger's ears perked toward the now quiet hillside. By evening, the site was cordoned off with yellow tape, a scar of mud, and twisted debris where the plaza had once stood. Neighbors stood at the edges, faces pale, boots smeared, some whispering gratitude, others muttering disbelief. Ranger sat at my feet, tail low, ears alert, as if cataloging the chaos. I walked among the remaining residents, guiding them to safe zones, pointing out unstable patches. Eileen Parker pressed a blanket into Tara's hands, murmuring reassurance, while others salvaged what they could from small garden beds or toppled fences. The air smelled of wet clay diesel, and fear and aroma that lingered longer than the drizzle. People approached quietly, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, eyes wide. "You really saw this coming," one said. Another nodded, showing cracked basement photos. Their homes were scarred, their trust fractured, but they listened now in ways HOA emails never achieved. I stayed back, letting them absorb the aftermath. The hill had done the talking. My warnings were finally evidence, not opinion. Ranger nudged my hand, reminding me we'd endured, that some vigilance mattered. The street was quieter, now punctuated by soft murmurs, occasional laughter from children returning to safer ground, and the slow, patient hum of a ridge that had finally spoken. For the first time in weeks I exhaled. Observation complete. Ground stable. Lives spared. Within days, county and city officials moved in. The site was officially declared a hazard zone. Yellow tape expanded, blocking all access. Investigators sifted through mud, broken stakes, and machinery documenting every detail. Emails, photos, and timestamp logs I had sent became central evidence. Kennedy Morgan, Cole Benson, and Tara Morgan were summoned for questioning. Kennedy's carefully rehearsed confidence crumbled under cross-examination. The disablement of the slope sensors, the unauthorized grading, and the ignored geotechnical warnings were laid bare. Each signature, each ignored report was now a recorded liability. The local press descended, cameras flashing across the scarred hillside. Headlines screamed, "HOA ignored, engineer warnings, landslide destroys community plaza," and "Sycamore Ridge disaster sparks statewide HOA reform." Social media lit up, sharing time-stamped photos, Eileen's basement images, and my log entries. The board's credibility evaporated faster than mud in the sun. Officially, the HOA was cited for reckless endangerment, tampering with monitoring systems, and negligent oversight. Restitution was mandated. The board resigned temporarily, insurance claims were filed, and state oversight was imposed for 5 years. I provided every piece of documentation, standing as a cooperating witness for the investigation. Sarah Miller coordinated the county geotechnical reports, verifying the slope's instability. Legal proceedings moved slowly, but the outcome was inevitable. The HOA's negligence had a price. For the first time, the community could see consequences manifest in real terms. Arrogance and denial had been measured, and the ledger balanced. The hillside, the logs, the time-stamped emails, they all told the same story, and now the law agreed. Weeks later, Sycamore Ridge began to breathe again. The scarred slope patched with steel anchors and erosion barriers slowly reclaimed life. Native wildflowers were planted along the stabilized hillside, a living reminder of listening before it's too late. Eileen Parker led the effort, neighbors volunteering quietly, hands in soil patience stitched into every row. Ranger padded beside me, occasionally chasing a butterfly or pausing to inspect a new sprout. I knelt, pressing soil around a lupine, feeling the weight of months of tension lift slightly with each handful. The hill was healing. The neighborhood's arrogance had been tempered. A small plaque arrived, official from the State Department of Emergency Management, recognizing vigilance, integrity, and service to community safety. I set it beside the wooden listening field sign, silent and durable, where anyone could see that careful observation mattered more than optics. News crews moved on, HOA reform took root, and the cul-de-sac slowly regained normal rhythm. Half the homes remained empty foreclosures, dotting the lower streets, while others repaired wiser than before. I sat on the ridge one evening, sun dipping behind trees, coffee in hand, Ranger at my side. The slope still breathing seemed to whisper approval. Some lessons are loud, some are quiet. The hill had spoken, the law had acted, and the neighborhood finally listened. I wrote the final entry in my logbook, ground stable, hill breathing, observation complete. I closed it, watching the last light fade, knowing that vigilance, attention, respect, patience was the only thing stronger than ignorance. Ranger nudged my knee. We'd done all we could. The rest was nature's to speak.